Hello, my name's Jim Wade. I'm a tax attorney here in Maine, and today this is going to be one probably out of a series of blog posts about the IRS stealth audit, otherwise known as the CP2000 notice. And I want to talk to you about this because many people, don't understand that IRS audits, while everyone says that they're not very, not a lot happens across America, less than 1%, I think. Really, IRS examinations, which aren't sort of counted in the IRS statistics, actually makes up a very large number of IRS, sort of, I guess you could call them, audits of taxpayers, where a taxpayer has been given notice by the IRS that there's a problem, required to make a response, and if not, there'll be additional taxes, interest, and penalty assessed. So it's very important that you understand the CP2000 notice, this IRS stealth audit, so that you can properly respond. All right, so here's the details. Less than 1% of all taxpayers are audited, but that doesn't include examinations such as the IRS matching program. These are called CP2000 exams. It happens when your reported income on your tax return doesn't match income information provided to the IRS. For example, W-2s, 1099 interest forms, 1099 dividend forms. If you're an independent contractor, 1099 NEC or 1099 miscellaneous. You take money out of your retirement account, 1099-R. These are all information returns that are required to be reported to the IRS. And when the IRS looks at your return, they're going to compare that information to what's been reported. And if there's a mismatch, you're going to get a CP2000 notice if there's going to be money due. If, let's say, for example, you omitted a W-2, but if that income was reported, you might also get credit for withholdings, and it might result in a refund. Well, you're not going to get a CP2000 notice for that. No, only if there's going to be a balance due. So these CP2000 exams, typically what they're going to do is they're going to tell you, not very well, that there is a mismatch between what's on your return and what's been reported to them. And having looked at these notices for many years, I understand them quite well. But for the general public, when you look at it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. You see original numbers, changes, and the amount of the change. You see all these numbers on the page, and then there'll be a section where I'll say, hey, this is the agency that or company that reported this information to us. Here's the form they used. Here's the amount. It sometimes can be very confusing. And on top of that, there is a balance due on that page, first page, saying, hey, we're proposing a change. This change is going to result in additional taxes, interest, and penalties of X. You've got 30 days to respond. And if you don't, you may end up owing more in taxes, interest, and penalties. So that is a problem. Now, if you agree with the CP2000 notice, hey, there was a W-2, I forgot it, okay, you don't do anything and they'll assess the tax and send you a bill. You can pay it in full or you can work out some other payment arrangement with them. If that applies to you, you're in the small minority, this isn't really for you. This is for everybody else who, generally speaking, has a problem with the changes being proposed. Because if you disagree, you've got to respond in 30 days. You've got to provide them with a copy of the notice. You've got to give them a response point by point as to what you disagree. And if necessary, provide documentation to support your belief as to whether there should be additional taxes or not. So once the IRS gets that, if it at all gets it, the IRS mail system has been terrible during COVID, the IRS might agree with you and not change the return. You again are in the small minority. Generally, the IRS is going to send you a letter saying either we need more time or we need more information. And you get this sort of back and forth with them providing information, and it seems like it never gets resolved. Or the IRS just might not respond at all and just disagree and assess the tax. The important thing to understand about that is if the IRS disagrees with you, they have to issue what they call a notice of deficiency, because now they can't assess the tax until certain procedural requirements have been met. And what that means for you is you now have what they call a ticket to U.S. tax court, where you can dispute the IRS's position without having to pay the tax first. Not many people understand this, but when you were dealing with a tax deficiency, meaning there is a balance due with the IRS, if you disagree, generally, you've got to pay the balance, submit a claim for a refund if you disagree with it, wait for the IRS to deny that refund claim, then you've got to go to federal district court to basically fight it out with the IRS to get your refund. That is so very time consuming and so very expensive that the government, in its wisdom, created this sort of administrative court to handle these kind of disputes without you paying the taxes first. But here's the rub. You have 90 days from this date of the notice of deficiency to make that request to have your case heard. If you don't, you now lose the right, generally speaking, to contest it unless you go through that rigmarole I mentioned earlier. Pay the tax, file a request for a refund, wait for it to be denied, then you file your court case in federal district court. So many people don't really, when they get this, they think this is just a disagreement with the IRS and they can kind of work it out over time. Well, there are some sort of baked in time limits. The first is you got to disagree in 30 days. If you don't, the IRS could just assess you that tax. And when they do, they give you that notice of deficiency. Then you've got 90 days to then further dispute it. If you don't, you lose the right to deal with it there. Now, there are some ways around it to get it fixed, but it's a whole hell of a lot harder and more expensive to do so. All right. Here are some of the big problems with these CP2000 exams. You oftentimes, especially with these certain types of income, if the IRS, let's for example, you are a gig worker and you just weren't thinking about it, now the IRS says you owe money based on the 1099 that was issued to you by the company that uses your services. So let's use Uber. Uber sends you a 1099. Well, now you go, oh, I got to start getting, I got to report this income, but I have expenses. All right, well, maybe you don't have all the expense information lying around. You need time to get it together. Well, IRS may not give you time to do that. Additionally, if you want to speak to someone, a real human being, you got to call. And on some notices, you can't even call them. You've got to fax them information, and you can't actually speak to a human being. So now you're sort of in this area where you can't get a hold of a live person to see if you can't get it resolved or ask about some of the stuff on that notice. Now, even if you properly respond to all of this, point number 3, the IRS might misplace it or ignore it and make the assessment, which can be super frustrating. I don't know about you, but generally a problem is best solved at the lowest level possible. The more you have to keep going up levels to resolve it, the more time-consuming and more expensive it gets. And the IRS has been so vastly underfunded that it is a nightmare to get it taken care of at the lowest level. Oftentimes mail is lost, or you'll fax something in and never gets dealt with. Maybe it gets lost in a pile of other stuff. It's very frustrating. And finally, you in fact may not understand what the IRS is asking for. And you may think you're responding correctly, or maybe you think this is what they're looking for, not give them what they want. And so the IRS goes, well, they didn't properly respond to the notice and just ignore you and make the assessment. So these are the big problems I see with these CP2000 exams, these stealth audits. I'm going to talk some more in the next episode about sort of here's an example of a notice, here's how we typically will respond to them, and I hope that will help you if you get one of those notices yourself. In the meantime, here's my contact information. If you have any questions about a CP2000 notice that you've received, or maybe some other questions about resolving your tax problems, give me a call or email me. Thank you very much. Bye.